Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to take a moment to discuss the distinctions that we saw in Chapter 9 regarding satellite and cable television and the evolution that we've seen through time. I think that it's important to start with first how satellite and cable television were established, then we can look at the fall specifically of satellite television, and then we can further look at the fall of both. But let's go ahead and start with looking at satellite versus cable television and the implications that it had there. While satellite technology was originally founded for use by NASA, we saw that it was quickly adapted as an opportunity for places like the federal government to continue to spread unique messages across the platforms of the United States. Granted, this meant that someone had to have access to a TV to be able to access the information the government was distributing. It gave people an opportunity, and specifically the government and other public organizations, a platform in order to spread their message. An incredibly important example is PBS, or the Public Broadcasting Station. PBS got its foundation not only in news, but also in the educational resources that it began to found. In these findings, we saw things eventually evolve, such as the Reading Rainbow, which established foundations of phonics for children, but also established concepts of being able to share, being able to care, being kind to one another. This was considered an essential part of PBS because it was something that people felt was an important foundation for the United States and their operation. What we also saw Christian news networks and Christian networking platforms all taking advantage of this satellite technology in order to continue to spread their message. This dispersion of the Christian message was something that we actually saw an influx of Christianity around the origin and the spread of television because it was one of the few free platforms in which people had the opportunity and access to. Cable television at its founding, though, was a little bit more exclusive because it was less about what we saw happening and how the federal government could establish this creation, but it was more about what people could and could not put on there and what people could do more for entertainment. The main distinction that even the text analyzes is that satellite television became a distribution of information, whereas cable television became a distribution of entertainment. And this distribution of entertainment was something that became not only costly, but also posed an opportunity for people to begin to push the boundaries of what we saw the distinctions lie, which is where we began to see some of the fall of satellite television. Specifically, when we look at the open skies concept that Satellite Foundation was founded on, was that if your satellite could pick it up, you had the opportunity to view it. And this open skies concept made it incredibly difficult for individuals to profit off of any satellite networks, but also made it incredibly difficult for people to monitor the broadcasting that was happening. Thus, we saw the institution of the FCC evolve. The FCC was founded in order to not only monitor, but also set strict guidelines as to what was okay to publish and broadcast on most media and what was not. For example, things like swear words were banned on both cable and satellite television for an incredibly long time. We saw the Cable Act be instituted, and that was where we saw the final decrease of satellite television and the increase of cable sales. The Cable Act was an opportunity for the federal government to regulate even further what they had already done with satellite television. And in this regulation, we saw the opportunity for the federal government to put people into a bind and make them abide by very specific standards. In this abiding by the very specific standards, we saw an increased attendance in once again things like PBS and Christian Foundation stations, and a decrease in things that were questionable and provided contrary ideas to what the federal government thought was productive. But we also have to understand that society has taken a shift away from both of these mediums nearly completely, thus seeing the fall of both. While we recognize right now that cable television is incredibly expensive, we also have to recognize that satellite television is functionally obsolete as the two have blended together. Think about it when you're driving down a neighborhood. What you see are technically satellites on the tops of houses, but those satellites are actually connected to cable providers, therefore showing that the differentiation is no longer a differentiation, but instead a combination. The cost not only prohibits individuals and the flourishing of cable television, but it also makes it a lot more substantial that individuals shift to something like streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, etc. And this shift not only shows that people have a very specific content that they are looking for, but it also demonstrates the premise that individuals don't want their things regulated, which is where we see the FCC come back into play. When the FCC was founded, it was an opportunity to make sure that most programming on television was family friendly and there were no necessary monitors needed to be put in place. But now that we've seen an uptick in things like streaming services, there's been a clear distinction as what the FCC can and cannot regulate. Programs such as Big Mouth on Netflix have developed as an opportunity for people to resist everything that the FCC used to not be able to be allowed, and has introduced concepts that are not necessarily family friendly. This introduction provides an opportunity to for people to feel like their First Amendment right is not being invaded upon by the FCC any longer, but it also provides an opportunity for a more lucrative streaming service. So overall, when we take a step back, we can recognize that satellite television is incredibly useful for what it was intended, not only with space like NASA, but also the introduction of public broadcasting. Then we saw the devolution as open skies made it a lot more difficult for people to profit, and the Cable Act for people to be able to make and increase sales off of the Cable Act instead of looking at satellites. But then we've seen as 2018 has evolved that there's been a fall of both, not only because people don't want their content regulated quite as much, but also because there is an inherent barrier and cost to the combination of satellite and cable.